This was supposed to be a 5 minutes video, but when I started writing it, I couldn't stop and it turned out to be gigantic. I hope you have the patience to follow me to the end. Trust me, there will be some laugh along the way. Today I wanted to make a cue from the Netflix series The Witcher and the Black Panther movie to make a broader point about how sometimes in recent years we pay too much attention to the technical side of stories, meaning the whole production part of a movie or a series, and the aesthetic of the characters rather than the well-being of the stories themselves, but we'll get to this later. I just wanted to remind you that Odyssey to Trappist 1, my first sci-fi novella, has been recently published on Amazon. You can find it in ebook and paperback, and if you like science fiction and if you want to support the channel, please check it out, links in the description. As you might have guessed from the title, today we are talking about recasting, which is why I choose these two specific cases. In fact, I'm sure you all know by now that Henry Cavill left the role of Geralt in the Witcher series due to artistic differences with the creative team about the direction the series was taking and the respect for the original material. Last summer I made a detailed video on the subject on my Italian channel, so if you want me to translate it and publish on this channel too, just let me know in the comments. While as some of you may remember, 2 years after the release of Black Panther, Chadwick Boseman, who plays the superhero protagonist of the movie, sadly died of cancer. As tragically different as the modalities are, we are looking at two major franchises that had to change their protagonist. As immense as the MCU is, even the production of The Witcher, which is obviously smaller than the colossal Marvel project, still represent a gigantic investment. According to Forbes, Netflix claimed to have invested 92 million for the first season, so 11.5 million per episode, 176 million for the second season, so 22 million per episode, and 50 million for the prequel Blood Origin, so 12.5 million per episode. Now, I haven't found the figures for the third season, but I don't think it's absurd to assume that they spent at least as much as the second season, if not more. That add at least another 176 millions, bringing the total budget to 495 millions, adjusting by the decimals. And at this point we can pretty much round it up to $500 million. I don't know how much they invested in the fourth season, considering Henry Cavill's departure and the show falling from grace, but I imagine they reached at least 600 millions. We are talking about an immense investment, a gigantic pressure to get some kind of return from a dying show that is hemorrhaging an absurd amount of viewers. I put the emphasis here to emphasize the desperate situation they are in, a boat loaded with gold sinking in the Bermuda Triangle. The captain has abandoned the ship and the crew has only dust tape to plug leaks that even the Titanic could not. As for the MCU, the investment for Black Panther is not so critical. It is 200 million for the first film and 250 million for the second, so a total of 450 millions, basically 2/3 of The Witcher. But in the narrative context of the MCU, which now has 34 feature films under its belt, of which the first Black Panther is the 18th and the second Black Panther is the 30th, they're two drops in the bucket. Their problem was that Black Panther came at a critical time, in the middle of Phase 3, one of the franchise's heydays. The 19th film, released just 2 months after Black Panther, was actually Infinity War. By then the Thanos saga had come to an end, and it was time for a change of look, let's put it like that. The first superheroes have been around for 10 years, many of them, like Iron Man and Captain America, has completed their respective story arcs, and it was time to say goodbye and bring a breath of fresh air to the Avengers. Black Panther, in the Marvel's plan, was to play a key role in this transition, positioning himself as one of the franchise flagship superheroes. Lo and behold, because of Boseman's infamous illness, they find themselves with a big Problem. These two giant franchises reacted differently to the same problem, in part because of the inherent possibilities of the show they were making. Marvel had three options: recast Chadwick Boseman by selecting a new actor to play Black Panther in the MCU, kill Black Panther off-screen and abandon the character, kill Black Panther off-screen and use one of the other 1,000 characters to collect the cape. Which is the only thing that Black Panther doesn't wear, so it's not the best metaphor, but in a nutshell, you get it. Let's start by saying that they absolutely could not give up on the character. The first movie was a smash at the box office. Against a budget of 200 million, it made 1,350 millions, multiplying the investment by a factor of 6.75. It was a time when all Marvel movies were at least tripling or quadrupling their budget. Some even went as high as a factor of per 7, like Avengers Endgame. But in any case, it made a high-end profit among all Phase 3 films, and it had a huge cultural impact. Although it was nothing special as a movie, I found it very overrated, and the fact that it was nominated for Oscars in 7 categories, including Best Picture, is an insult to cinema. Incidentally, Black Panther and Black Panther Wakanda Forever are the only MCU movies to win Oscars, and if the former was a decent, fine movie, Wakanda Forever is an unwatchable crap. But let's not deep into that right now. If I think those two movies has a total of 4 Oscars and the Guardian of the Galaxy trilogy has won any, I'm going to get pissed. My point was that even though it was a mediocre movie, it has the great merit of bringing the MCU the first black superhero to the screen. At the time, there were those who pointed out that Blade was also a Marvel character and theoretically took the top spot. But come on, it was a 98 movie, literally 20 years earlier, practically a generation away. We were bluntly talking about the first black superhero in the MCU. Because Black Panther was the 18th movie, 18th is a lot, and it comes in the middle of Phase 3, and I think at this point he's still the only black superhero. You can count supporting characters, of course, like Falcon or War Machine. I mean main superheroes with at least one origin movie. Lead characters. I think you can also count Miles Morales' Spider-Man, partially because those animated movies are some of the best movies Marvel ever produced, but they're not really canon in the MCU. Or maybe they are, I don't know, they made up such a mess with that. So you can understand the cultural impact it had on the black community in America. By the 18th film, 10 years after Iron Man, they finally saw themselves represented. Represented by the king of an African nation that had never done anything to help Africa and its enslaved people, but let's leave hypocrisy for another time. Chadwick Boseman died and they had to make a decision. They can't throw away a character who is one of the most beloved, who is the first black superhero after 18 movies. Think of the message they would have sent and throwing away the first black superhero. And surely a key point for Marvel, it promised them to make a lot of money with the sequent films. Black Panther Wakanda Forever, despite being a crappy film, still made a lot of money at the box office. So there were only 2 real options: recast the actor or replace the character. These 2 options have obvious advantages and disadvantages. A recast would have had the virtue of allowing them to keep the character in the MCU and continue with the plans they had made for phases 4, 5 and 6, without having to change a comma. On the other hand, it would have been the first recast of a protagonist in a fictional universe they have created, where it was important that each character always be played by the same actor, so not to create confusion. The replacement, on the other hand, would have been easy enough. Just make Black Panther one of the other characters, someone from the family. Initially some theories pointed to the mother, some to the sister. In the MCU they are never a shortage of characters, and in the comics everyone end up wearing the cape sooner or later. And in fact in the comic the there is a period where Shuri, T'Challa's sister, is named Black Panther and ruler, albeit temporarily, and in fact they chose this route, elevating Shuri to the role of protagonist. The problem with this approach are three. 1. Killing T'Challa off-screen is a really shitty solution. It's very sad for the protagonist to die that way. 2. They need to write this passing of the baton well, and unfortunately they've proven times and times again that they do not know how to write strong female characters. Shuri actually turns out to be a pain in the ass. 3rd, you have to reshuffle the deck. Now you no longer have T'Challa for phases 4, 5 and 6, you have his sister, and it's not the same. She hasn't developed the same relationship with the other characters in the franchise, and you needed a movie just to introduce her, so Black Panther's introduction slipped away in the shared storylines. However, seeing how they've been progressing the last few years, so blindfolded, I guess they thought rehashing the phase structure would be no problem, like they were good at writing movies, like there were other good movies after Thanos' death beside Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So in this case, the aesthetic aspect of not recasting and instead using a different character who hadn't been considered for the role and hadn't interacted with the other characters in the Chor film was prioritized. In addition to 2018's Black Panther, T'Challa had actually appeared in 2016's Civil War, in 2018's Infinity War and in 2019's Endgame. 3 choral films during which he established a fundamental relationship with all the other characters of the franchise. The decision to replace the character instead of the actor totally destroyed the characterization of T'Challa, which took 4 years and 4 films. Movies, by the way, that are crucial to the fictional universe, leaving us with a character, Shuri, who participated but was behind the scene. She was barely seen in the choral movies, developed no relationship with the other characters in the most tense moments of the saga, chose a character who could not possibly have the same role as T'Challa in the future of the MCU, forcing the screenwriter to change their plans, which is never a good thing. All this to avoid a T'Challa with a different face, which would have been so bad? Would we as viewers really have disliked the recast so much? Was it really better to deprive ourselves of a character who has now become as important as T'Challa? For the actor's death, by the way, for such an extreme reason that has nothing to do with the story you are telling. Some might even say it would have been more respectful to continue his work instead of killing off the character he was playing. Really, would have been so bothered to see another actor in the role of T'Challa? Wouldn't it been enough for even those unfamiliar with the background to Google it for 2 seconds and find out that Boseman was died, and that's why the character changed face? Would we have been so confused? I don't know, I'm just asking. Personally, I would have preferred that they had not thrown away a character that took 4 years and 4 films to characterize and had big plans for in the future. And I say that as not fan of Black Panther. I've always been very critical to the movie. I always perceived him as bland as a character. But as a writer, as a viewer, I always tend to prioritize the good of the story over the good of pure aesthetic, because that's what it is about. They just didn't want to recast, they didn't want 2 actors playing the same characters within the MCU, they didn't want him to change the face, and they preferred to destroy a character instead. I have no words. Netflix, unlike Marvel, had no real options. They could not kill Geralt or even have one of the other characters take his place. Recasting was a must. Now, I don't know what they're going to do, but the thing that bothers me is that ever since it was announced that Liam Hemsworth was replacing Henry Cavill in the role of The Witcher, there have been a lot of people wondering how they're going to justify Geralt's changes in connotation within the story. Since last summer, speculations and theories have been popping up, and it's crazy stuff. Why would there be a need to justify such a thing within the story itself? From the story perspective, nothing has changed, and there are no explanation that doesn't create more problems than they solve. A Screen Rant article summarizes the theories that have appeared on the web, and they are one more nonsense than the other. There are those who speculate that Geralt will be attacked by a sorcerer, hit by some crazy magic that he cannot defend against, and BAM! It changes his feature as a side effect? Noting that if it was Yennefer who cast such spell, it would also be a great way to add conflict to their already troubled relationship. Give this guy a Nebula award! As much as Sapkowski's universe is full of magic that can disfigure you, what was supposed to happen? That Yennefer cast a magic that bounces off Geralt's face and for some reason turn his beautiful face in an equal beautiful face? Come on, that's what I expected from a parody. It's a world where wizards do nothing but change their bodies through magic. Why wouldn't Yennefer restore his face? Do we really want a scene where she tells him, "You look better like this," and Geralt look in the mirror and yeah. I actually want this, cause I'm watching this show only for the trash now, so I would laugh so hard. I want this, but it's not good for the story. Another very similar theory is that Geralt can have his feature changes by Yennefer for security reasons, because there's a lot of people looking for him. And this is one of the most nonsense thing I have ever heard, apart from the fact that it's Ciri the one being hunted by the entire universe. Geralt is hardly chased by anyone, and anyone doesn't give a shit about Geralt. So what would be the point to change Geralt appearances and not everyone else's? And by the way, Witcher eyes, Witcher weapons, Witcher armor, wolf medallion, and especially the white hair, that fucking white hair, which I remember is a distinguished feature of Geralt because he survived the herb test longer than anyone else. That's why they called him the White Wolf. All these features will remain and are what make him recognizable. It's not like there are smartphones and photos in this world. Most people doesn't even know what Geralt looks like. It wouldn't do anything to change the shape of his nose and the cheekbones while keeping the most distinctive feature of the only fucking white-haired witcher running around the globe. Dyeing his hair would have been more effective. He already have bleached hair. Do you know how well the pigment sticks? There are those who speculate that since ancient blood is used in this series to create Witcher, that's the main point of departure from the books. It's so stupid that they changed this. If you want an accurate video on the differences between ancient blood in the series and ancient blood in the books, I already made one in my Italian channel. Let me know if you want me to translate it and publish on this channel too. Write it in a comment. I mean, as I said, they speculate that Geralt, who is suffering from his wounds, could be healed by Yennefer using Ciri's blood, and because of that he ended up undergoing further mutations like changes of facial features. It would be a great way to use the biggest piece of crap of this entire series to solve the problem. If it weren't for the fact that Ciri is now lost in the desert and I don't know what they want to do with this show, but she and Geralt won't see each other anytime soon. Maybe this theory was born before the third season came out? I don't know, it's absurd anyway. There follows a lot of B-movie solution, like Rience disfiguring Geralt with fire and his face healed and reformed with other features, or Vilgemort's hitting him so hard during their duel that he changes his feature. I would have laughed so hard. But none of these things happened in the third season because Geralt killed Rience and healed normally from Vilgefort's beatings. None of the assumptions made before the release of the third season turned out to be correct. There are those who say that just having Dandelion make a joke about having a different face would be... that would be the ugliest solution of it all, because it would not justify the changes, it was just focus the attention of the viewer on that particular thing. You don't want to draw attention to the problem. If they were to do something like that, I don't know, they should never work on a show again. There are shows where you can break the fourth wall, and it's the shows where that component is very present. Fleabag, Deadpool, in all the others, it's sometimes to avoid like the plague. It's not something you can do once. There are those who have seen too many Marvel movies and speculate that since there is a multiverse and Ciri can travel across worlds, she can bring alternate versions of Geralt into this world. It is obvious that these people do not know shit what they are talking about, because in Sapkowski's universe there is a multiverse, yes, and Ciri travels through it. Yes, but there is not a multiverse consisting in infinite versions of the same world, but infinite different worlds, including our world, by the way, the real one. So Geralt does not exist in infinite copies, but in only one single copy with one single face. In fact, this solution has been debunked by the screenwriters themselves. Besides, what solution would that be? What would you do with the Cavill's Geralt? Would you kill him and get a new one from the multiverse like it was a Witcher supermarket discount? Then why not get an army of them? I mean, guys, how does such a solution solve the problem without creating 1,000 more? Someone have speculated that the story will be told by a different narrator, that we have seen Dandelion's version so far, and that from the next season on, the narrator will be, I don't know, that girl they made up for Blood Origin who travels through time and space to preserve stories, another random bard we haven't seen yet, the bard of the episode in Aretusa of Nothing Is What It Seems, that everybody already hate that fucking bard. What a crappy solution, come on! In this case, why should only Geralt appearances change and all the others remain unchanged? And what do you expect Bard to sing about? Have you ever listened to a folk song? They would sing about the white hair, the yellow eyes, the sharp and scary feature, a characteristic that is emphasized in the book and neither actor embodies, by the way. They certainly don't sing about the exact position of your cheekbones, the shape of the eyebrows, the chin, the nose. Come on, when a bard tells a story he doesn't bring a photo with him. But I will leave the article in the description if you want to dive into the madness more than I just did. Let's move on to the most likely solution. According to Redanian Intelligence, which reported an interview with Tomasz Beginski and Lauren Hisrick, executive producer and showrunner respectively, and I have to say that it's the most elegant solution so far, also because it's directly inspired by the fifth book of the saga. In the second chapter of the fifth and last book of the saga, if we don't count the first two books which were a collection of short stories, otherwise it would be the seventh book. In the second chapter of The Lady of the Lake, we find Nimue, a sage who lives near the lake, which is clearly an Arthurian cycle reference. In short, Nimue is fascinated by the story of Geralt and Ciri, and it is immediately clear that this timeline takes place hundreds of years later, and the story, now a legend, has been lost among the tales and 1,000 versions. As it happens with fairy tales, the Brother Grimm put down on paper a precise version of fairy tales, but for each fairy tale there are many versions depending on the place, the time and who tells the story. Similarly, Nimue finds it difficult to reconstruct what really happened, so she summoned Conduit Ramurs, an Oni romancer, and instructed her to dream about the events that really happened. When Conduit Ramos arrives at Nimue's place, she is surprised to see a portrait of Cyrilla, but Nimue corrects her by telling her that no portraits of Cyrilla have come down to us, that the painting represents Pavetta, her mother, and that any depiction of Cyrilla has been lost in time, and that those who portray her today are doing nothing more than a work of fantasy. No one knows what Ciri actually looked like. So what they probably want to do is to take this idea and change the subject. No depiction of Geralt has reached us, and from the depiction of The Witcher with Henry Cavill's appearances, we pan on another painting where Geralt have Liam Hemsworth features. And then we go back to the series keeping Liam Hemsworth. Just another depiction of Geralt. I must say I kinda like it, it's a nice and poetic solution. Too bad it's useless. In books, this chapter has a very specific function, to make us doubt of everything, to make us wonder what is true, what is false, to mix reality, legend and fantasy. The last book is the one where Ciri begins to seriously travel through space-time. There is a beautiful sequence of jumps about halfway through the books, and it's also the book in which, among the quotation at the beginning of chapters, real writers and intellectuals like Goethe and Edgar Allan Poe begin to appear, in addition to the usual quotation from Dandelion and the book in the universe of The Witcher. It is Sapkowski who mixes the real with the fantastic and brings out his world building, which has been dormant, relegated to little hints and quotes scattered here and there. Sapkowski's world building is very unique, which is why I was happy to see the book adapted into a series. Too bad it's actually the first thing they decided to destroy. Anyway, as I was saying, such a nice and poetic solution to tell us that different actors are different variations of the same characters. Wow, really? So Christian Bale, Ben Affleck and Robert Pattinson are different depictions of Batman? You don't say! Guys, I have no words. And by the way, it seems that instead of Nimue or Conduit Ramos, it might be Senchai leading this revelation. That damn stupid witch who travels through time-space preserving stories, that witch they made up for the narrative abomination that is Blood Origin, an S-written spin-off that they used to destroy the very concept of ancient blood, twisting its origin, the role and the purpose. Of course, I can't wait to see more about the character. Bring it on, please, I can't wait! Well, even though this theory may seem to find confirmation in the words of Baginski and Historic, this is all speculation at the moment. But does it make sense for you to bring up this whole circus to contextualize the fact that Geralt had different connotations? They have 2 seasons, because the 5th will be the last, and they still have to adapt 3 books: The Baptism of Fire, The Tower of the Swallow and The Lady of the Lake. In addition, they have padded it with 1,000 unnecessary subplots that are there just to waste a lot of time. Spending precious time to contextualize Geralt's face seems like a huge stupid thing to do. I sincerely hope that they just ignore the whole thing and continue as nothing happened. That would be the best solution. Finally, we came to the question I wanted to ask in this video. Are recasts really problematic? Have we really reached the point where instead of recasting a character, we would rather have him or her destroyed? With serious repercussion for the story as happened with Black Panther? Or if there are no other solution, that we find a way to contextualize in the story the changes? Recasting the protagonist is always problematic, but we have really reached the point where we care more about the aesthetic factor than the well-being of the story. Do we really have to claim for it to be contextualized with the story, where nothing has actually changed? Do we really have to come up with over a dozen crazy theories, none of which is even remotely satisfactory. Can't we just feel sorry for the death or departure of an actor and make a habit of who picks up the cape? To make the first example that comes to my mind, Spartacus, the 2010 series with Lucy Lawless. The star Andy Whitfield died of cancer after the first season and was replaced by Liam McIntyre for the second and third seasons. I had no idea, and as I switched from season 1 to season 2, I found myself watching a completely different Spartacus. After a what the fuck moment, thanks to a quick Google search, I found out what happened. And, well, I was sorry I had grown fond of the first actor. I preferred him facially. The other one has the Furet-like faces feature that didn't suit me for some reason. Probably just because I was used to the other actor. But you know what? After a few episodes I got used to him and I didn't notice anymore. No one questioned how they would justify the changes. No one speculated that he was disfigured in the arena and his face healed differently than they were at the beginning. No one speculated that Jupiter electrocuted his face with lightning, resetting his flesh and bone structure, or any other nonsense. The actor changed, and we got over it. I'm sure many of you feels the same way, but from what I'm seeing online it seems like it's not the same for many people. And I tell you guys, these people are not there to write a good story, they're there to give you what they think you want. That's why every fantasy series in the last 20 years turned out to be a bad copy of Game of Thrones. And if you guys scream for them to justify those changes in the show, hell, you know they are fucking desperate. They will try to please you. And if you ask them to make a writing error, they will make a writing error. I know the Marvel Cinematic Universe has spoiled everyone a bit with the one actor to one character paradigm, but things doesn't always go as planned. Unforeseen things happens. In decades of a franchise history, 16 for Marvel and 5 for The Witcher, it happens that actors die or move away due to personal or creative differences. These problems exist, and we cannot allow them to undermine the story we are telling. This is a plea to Hollywood. I know you're all there watching my videos. When these misfortunes happen, just do a simple recast, without messing around. Without complicating your lives, you often can't even write a decent show, let alone put yourself through the wrangler.